In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create materials. All right, so we've got our game assets in. We've created some prefabs. We understand the benefit of using prefabs. And now what I want to do is I want to take this a little bit further and finalize my game asset by creating a material. So the game object has this default material on it already, but I want to create a new one. So what are we going to do? Let's go to our meshes folder and let's go to environment, and we have this materials folder. I'm going to remove these materials that are here. These are the ones that came in at import. And so I'm just going to select both of them and hit delete. Now remember, if you delete any of those materials and they are tied to a game object, your game object may show up as magenta in your preview. And so you may want to just do a quick check of that. All of these should have the default material on there instead of those materials that were used earlier. So under our environment, under materials, let's right click and let's create a new material. Let's rename this material, and I'm going to call this rock underscore L underscore, whoops, let me try that again, underscore A underscore MAT, just for material. You don't have to put the MAT at the end. I mean, obviously you'd be able to see if it was a material, but I like to have that just to differentiate between the names. Okay, we may have to access this through code or something like that. So just have a naming convention that you can work with. All right, so with this material and with it selected, we could start adding maps to this shader. Okay, so first thing that we need to do with a material is we need to determine the shader that we're going to use. With Unity 5, there is a brand new standard shader. The standard shader uses what's called a PBR workflow, physically based rendering workflow. It might also be heard as PBS, or physically based shading. In this case, with our standard material, it gives us the main maps. We have an albedo, which is basically your base color map, a metallic map, which will determine the metalness of your object. It also has smoothness tied to that. If you're using a metallic map, smoothness should be in the alpha channel of that texture. Normal map, height map, occlusion, emission, and a detail mask. Okay, so those are the main maps that you'll have there. Now, whenever you are determining what shader to use, something like rocks, a metal map, or a metallic map will probably not be used. So instead of using a metallic workflow, which is what standard uses, let's left click on the shader and use a specular setup. So notice how this changes. Instead of metallic, we now have specular. Okay, this is going to be used on materials or surfaces that have a dielectric material. Okay, so kind of like plastics or rock or wood. Okay, anything that is non-metallic. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this up. Let's left click on this little circle right next to albedo, and let's choose the texture we want to use for this rock large. Now I have named these accordingly, so we should be able to go right down to rock underscore L underscore A, and you'll see ALB. That is for albedo. Okay, so it makes it nice and easy to understand. That is now applied, and you can see a preview of that in your material here. Let's left click on specular. Let's do the same thing. Let's scroll down and we'll go to the rock underscore L underscore A specular. Now under the specular, it's important to remember that in the alpha, let's go ahead and switch this to none. In the alpha, smoothness is also hidden there. Okay, so you need to apply your smoothness values, if you have any, into the alpha channel of your map. Okay, and that's what I've done here. All right, so rock underscore L underscore A, and then we have our normal map. Let's go ahead and get that, and this is going to be rock underscore L. Now really quickly, you'll notice with the normal map, it says the texture is not marked as a normal map. What does that mean exactly? If we go to our textures, find any one of these normal maps. Let's just use this one. Notice how the texture type is set to texture. It needs to be set to normal map. Now, I normally don't go into this side of things and switch these up, because whenever I apply that as a material, it says fix now. And so it's really quickly, it fixes that, sets everything up the way it needs to be, and it looks nice and neat. Now, I don't have a height map or occlusion or emission or detail. So these three are the main ones that you will use across most of your game objects inside of Unity. Very special cases, you might need some of these others. Okay. Now, I also use secondary maps, and this is really cool because you can get even more detail out of your texture using secondary maps. So you can use a detail albedo. So if you want something like a really fine or grainy dirt, you can apply that to this, and then you can multiply that. And then, same thing for your normal map. If you need really fine detail, use another normal map to overlay the existing normal map. Really cool. I'll show you how to use this here in just a moment. So how do we apply this material to our game object? Well, it's very simple. All we do is simply left-click the material, and we drag that onto the object that we want. Okay. Now watch this really quickly. If I select this object, notice that it now has that rock material applied to it. The default material has disappeared, and now all I have to do is hit apply, and it now applies that to all of my game objects that are in the scene, and it also applies it to the prefab in your project. Pretty cool. Alright, so let's go back to our material real quick because I want to show you the secondary map features here. So I don't have an albedo map for the secondary map, but I do have another normal map that I want to use. So let's left click on that, and let's scroll down, and let's find our rock overlay texture. Now you'll notice here in the scene it has kind of flipped the shading a little bit. It doesn't look quite right. And again, that's from the normal map not being marked as a normal map in the texture type. So let's hit fix now. It'll go ahead and fix that. And then now we have this really neat looking texture on our rock. So we get this fine detail in here. Very cool. All right, so now with all of our game objects, that should now be applied. Okay. Now remember, if you change the material, okay, at its base, it will change every other material that it's applied to, or every other game object's material that it's applied to. So that's why it automatically updated here. Okay. All right. Awesome. So we've learned how to create materials. We can now begin the process of assembling a level. We've learned a lot of the key features here. Now what we need to do is we need to create more materials for the rest of our objects. You get the idea of how this is going to work. So I want to really quickly step with you on the next one, so that way you know what to do throughout the rest of this. So let's go to our environment. Let's go ahead and do the mound next. So I'm going to go to materials. I'm going to right click and create a new material. We're going to call this mound, and let me lowercase mound underscore A, and then underscore MAT. Hit enter. We're going to add our albedo map, and here's my mound albedo. We don't have a metallic. Now, even though I have applied a texture to this, it's not a big deal if I switch my shader. So if I hit standard specular shade setup, you'll see that it keeps that albedo. Let's go to specular, mound specular. Let's go to the normal map. Let's fix now. We can adjust the intensity of our normal map if we need to, but normally 1 is enough. And then if we want to add a detail normal map, we can do so. We can do something like this light dirt, or in my case, I would like to do a sand overlay on this. So here's a sand normal, and that'll just add a little bit more to it. So let's fix that. And then I need to apply that to my game mesh. So in our environment, let's take our mound, let's drop that in. Let's add a component to this. So we're going to add our physics, and we're going to use the mesh collider. We're going to change the mesh that's being used, and we want to use the mound underscore a underscore col for collider. And then with that set, let's go to our materials. Let's drop that onto our game object. You'll see how that looks there. Nice and neat. And then we'll make a prefab out of this. So to make that out of a prefab, we'll just simply go to the prefabs folder, and then we'll left click and drag from the hierarchy into our prefabs folder, and there we go. Perfect. So what I want you to do is I want you to create the rest of the materials for the environment pieces, and then also set up the prefabs for all of the environment pieces. It's the exact same steps that we've been using. There are going to be a couple of pieces, I believe it's going to be the small rocks, that are going to use a different texture. They won't have, for the normal map I should say. I'll show you how to set those up at a later time, probably in the next lesson, just to help you out with that. I believe it uses the rock large normal map. Okay, so go ahead and finish that out. In the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to create a terrain, because that's going to be the base part of our level, and then we'll start learning how to use these game objects that we've created, or these prefabs, to start set dressing our level. And we'll get into that next.